Hi everyone, it's Katie, and today I wanted to talk about modifying decks. That is, trimming and edging and writing on different decks. This is something I was initially terrified to do because if you've watched my videos for a little while, you might know that I quite often shake. However, there came a time where I had to do it. I had the Otherworld Tarot, which was a Schiffer deck, and we all know how Schiffer decks often have absolutely huge borders. And it wasn't a deck I was getting along with at all, so I decided to trim it. And it actually turned out a whole lot better than I thought it was going to. Now, I still didn't connect with that deck after, a while, so I decided to trade it. So I don't have that one to show you anymore. However, it was the beginning of the end. After that first trim, I realized how much of a difference it can really make to a deck. Since then, I've trimmed a number of decks, and I've also started edging some decks. Now, it's not something that I feel the need to do to all decks, but occasionally a deck will come into my life and it's just, I don't know, you just look at it and know what needs to be done. So I just use scissors. These are a pair of, $20 scissors that I picked up from Officeworks quite a while ago, and that's what I use. For the corners, I have this very small corner rounder. I haven't got a clue what brand this is. I got it off eBay secondhand, but it's great. I did have like an orange and white one that I got from Spotlight, and it was okay, but it was quite big, a big corner, and it also stopped working after one or two decks. This one has been great, and I've used it for pretty much every other deck. Then for edging, for the metallic edges for gold, and I also have silver and bronze, but I haven't used those colors yet. I just got the Brilliance Dewdrop, and it came in a little set of the 4. And these I also got on eBay. And then for the blacks and the browns, I have these two Distress Inks by Jim Holtz. This is the black Soot, and then I also have the vintage photo. I have written on one deck, and for that I used this Tombow pen that I found at Daiso, so for like $2.80. I love this pen. I use it all the time. It has the very thin end, which I use to write on, but then it also has a large end. Sharpies are good too, but this dries instantly, and I've never had a problem. Like, I bought it to write on stickers and things, and it dries instantly. I've never had a problem with it smudging or smearing or coming off at all, so I chose to use that when I wrote on one of my decks. So I thought I'd show you the decks that I still have, that I haven't traded or sold, that I've modified, and I'll give you a bit of a glimpse at what the result looks like. This first deck is the Vintage Wisdom, which is an oracle deck quite a lot of us will be very familiar with. It's absolutely beautiful, and it does have a very, very vintage theme, as the name would suggest. The backs are very brown, and the fronts do have different coloured borders, but again, they've got a very brownish sort of tinge to them. And as usual, the sides were very white. So I decided to use the vintage photo and ink the sides, and I think it looks fabulous. It definitely goes perfectly with this backing. As I said, the fronts are all kind of different colors, so it'd be impossible to match the fronts really, unless you were going to get a whole bunch of different inks, but it matches perfectly with the backings and the tone of that brown. So I love how these turned out. This next deck is the Hallmark Tarot, which is a beautifully bright Rider-Waite-Smith clone. And this one, as you can see, has black borders and black borders on the back as well. And the sides of the deck were just completely, absolutely white. Now, the borders themselves didn't bother me at all. So I felt no need to trim it. But I thought this would be a perfect example of a deck that would look great with the black edging. And so that is what I did, using the Tim Holtz again. And it looks fabulous. It just kind of makes the backs and the fronts fit together. Next deck that I edged in black was the Anna K. This actually took me a little bit longer. Again, I felt no need to trim the deck. The borders really don't detract from the imagery at all, I don't think. I don't trim just for the sake of trimming. I only trim if the borders really do bother me, and if I think it won't, you know, ruin the backing or the shape or whatever. Some cards just don't lend themselves to trimming very well. The reason it took a little bit longer is because the backing isn't actually black. And this was the first deck that I learned that, because all of the other decks that I'd inked had borders and backings that really allowed for the ink to kind of, because it will bleed over onto the image a little bit. So for the Anna K, I had to use a tissue to wipe off the ink on the backs of each card as I was going. So it took me quite a while longer, but I was really happy that I did, because it was, you did see the black ink on the backing, just because it's kind of like this really dark brown green. And with the black, it really did show up. As you can see, it's quite a difference. So it did take me a little bit longer, but I was really happy with the result, and it just meant I got to spend plenty of time with my beautiful Anna K. This next one is the Druid Craft, and it's pretty famous for being trimmed, because the cards are just absolutely giant, like huge, almost too big to handle. And there's not only this kind of stone that goes around as a border, then it's also a large white border. So it just, for me, it really did diminish the images. It kind of washes them out a little bit. So when I trimmed it, not only did it feel like a normal size deck then, a deck that I would enjoy handling and working with, it also just, the colors and the detail in the image really did pop. I know we use that word a lot when we talk about trimming cards, but for this deck it certainly was the case. I mean, would you look at these greens? They're just gorgeous. I haven't edged this deck yet, but I'm thinking about doing it. I know I've seen people do like a brown to match the backing, but I'm actually thinking of doing it in the gold. So I haven't done that yet, but that is my plan for when I'm ready to work with this beautiful deck. And I mean, with this you can see that it is really hard to get it perfect, you know, like there are differences. But when you put the deck together as a whole, it doesn't really affect using it as long as you get it fairly well. I mean, like, I don't know if you can, but there will be slight variances. But when you put the deck together in your hand, you don't notice it so much. So that was one thing I was worried about, was that you'd feel it. You'd feel cards poking out. But the thing is, if you do, that means you haven't trimmed it properly and you need to go back and give it a little bit more of a trim. They don't feel as smooth and perfect as untrimmed cards, that's for sure. But it's also, even when they're not perfectly the same size, it also doesn't feel like you've got bits poking out everywhere. They kind of do end up coming together okay. So that is a concern I know people have, that they're not going to be able to get it perfect. But the thing is, you don't really need to. Everyone knows I love this deck. It's the Dreamtime Reading Cards by Laura Bowen. This deck I decided to edge in black. I had no desire to trim it, although I do think it would be absolutely incredible to trim. I think the colours would just look incredible. I still really like the keyword and the name being there for how I use the deck. The backing has it is red and coloured to the edge. So this is another one that I had to kind of wipe down, but it's very glossy, so it was very easy to do so. And I just used the black ink, and I think it really goes really well. Again, this was an example of where the cardstock was very white, and it didn't look terrible, obviously, but there is something really quite nice about it. It just feels a lot more finished. And the black really suits the feeling and the energy of this deck, as well as just the aesthetic. And this is the Mystic Faerie Tarot, one of my absolute favorite decks. I've done a review on this deck, and I adore this deck. It's just such a fun, playful deck. And if you have the Shadowscapes, which I know is a very popular deck, a lot of people have, it's very similar in that this gold border is it's shiny. It's not metallic or foiled, but it's got a shine to it, just like the silver on the Shadowscapes does. And it's the same on the backing, which is a very beautiful touch. It just really works with this deck. And so I decided this is the deck that made me look into getting gold ink. And so this is the gold ink from the Brilliance Dewdrops, and it's perfect for this deck. It looks like it's the same color. It looks like it came this way. At least it does to me. It has got a slight shine to it, but it's not a metallic-y sort of color that you'd get with, you know, like the Hay House gilding or something. It has got a slight sparkle to it in some lights. And yeah, like it literally is the same color as this backing and the front. So this just completed this deck off perfectly. I just think it looks absolutely fabulous. This next deck is the Goddess Tarot by Chris Walter, and is a deck that I got in a trade. I trimmed and edged this deck, and I think it just completely brought this deck to life, to be honest. This is one of the extra cards, and as you see, it had this white border, and if you can, it really did detract from the image. It made the image inside the borders feel really small and distant, and it also kind of just washed out some of the colors. I don't know, that's just how I felt anyway. And the border was also white on the back. The brown kind of, it almost looks like terracotta to me, the wood or the stone borders, these parts, felt pointless with the white border. It felt like too much, I think, along with these kind of borders that match the suits. But without the white border, all of a sudden this border felt special. It felt like how it was supposed to be. And then I also edged it in gold, which kind of matches the backing, which has this blue and gold look. And then the fronts are, you know, got that kind of yellowy tone to them. So to me, I love how this deck turned out with both the trimming and the edging. It just feels really special and goddess worthy now with the trimming as well. This next one is the Universal Tarot, which is a complete clone by US Games of the Rider-Waite-Smith. It's quite a popular deck because it has the exact same symbolism and even very similar coloring and everything. It's just, I guess, slightly prettier artwork. I decided to trim and edge this deck, and it's become a pocket deck that I carry around in my bag. And I absolutely love it. I love how it turned out. This edition is the one that has the white borders with the titles, and then also like the blue line on each side of the borders. I don't really like the backings, but they've got a very gold sort of look to them, so I decided to edge it in gold as well. I actually really love how it looks. It looks really kind of used, and I mean, it is a very well used deck now, but I just absolutely love how it looks. And the last deck I have to show you is my Hardy Tarot. Now, I purchased the large black bordered edition, and I might try to insert a image of before I trimmed them, because it didn't come with a spare card. This was the trimming that I fretted over the most. This isn't a cheap deck. It is a limited edition deck of 50 decks. So it's got a bit of collectible value to it, and it was just a really beautiful special deck, and the borders did look really quite fancy and ornate. Like, there was something appealing about the borders to an extent, but the cards were also just so big that I didn't see myself wanting to work with them at that size. And I'd also, prior to purchasing them, how I'd fallen in love with this deck was I'd just seen the images. And then not too long after that, I'd seen the cards as they were with the borders, and I'd kind of fallen out of love a little. So after a little bit of stressing and chatting with people in the Truth and Story Facebook group, I decided to put the scissors to it. And I have to be honest, after the first couple of cards, I started freaking out, thinking I'd made the worst decision and thought I'd completely buggered quite a big investment. But obviously, once you've made the first cut, you have to keep going. So I did. And once I finished and I saw them all together, I fell in love all over again. It certainly doesn't look as grand and ornate and fancy. There is, like, the borders did bring that element to the cards, but it's much more me. The art really stands out and speaks, and they're a beautiful size now. They're a little bit square, and they are a little bit perhaps smaller than a regular deck. I think if this was just a deck that I bought because I wanted it to be pretty and I wanted to have it, I would have been happy with the borders, but I knew I wanted to really work with this deck, so I am really glad that I decided to trim it. It was also the hardest deck to trim because there was an inner black border, and I didn't think about this prior, but because the border on the inside was black, some of the cards also have quite a bit of black on them. Some of them even have more than this. So cutting along here was really hard to know that I was getting the right spot, especially because the backing isn't much help either. So for a couple of them, I actually had to trace around an already cut card to get it right. So this took me the longest, was the most stressful, but I'm absolutely thrilled with how it ended up turning out. I haven't edged it, and this is another thing I've been talking to people about in the Truth and Story Facebook group. I still haven't made a decision. I thought perhaps seeing it in video might help some people, help them give me some advice. I'm considering edging this deck. I'm not sure if I want to do it in black or in silver, or perhaps not at all. I've also written on the cards. I mean, you can tell the difference, but some of them, like this one, I would occasionally have to, like, if I just saw it, I'd have to, like, count out the ones. So for the mages, I've just put the Roman numeral number, and for the minors, I've put the number and the elemental symbol. It wasn't entirely necessary, but I am glad that I decided to go ahead and do that eventually. But yeah, if you have any opinions on what I should do in terms of coloring the edges of this deck, please leave a comment below, because I'm stuck on this one. Part of me kind of feels like I've done everything else to this deck. I've trimmed it, I've written on it, I might as well edge it. And the other part of me is just not sold on the idea of, you know, what color or what. I'm just not sure. So a little side note to this video, let me know what you think I should do with the edges of this deck. So that's a look at some of the decks that I've modified, trimmed, edged, written on. I thought this would give you an idea, if you aren't someone who trims or modifies their decks, this will give you an idea of I guess why some of us crazy people put the scissors to our beautiful decks. And also, if you do trim, perhaps you have or are thinking about getting one of these decks and wanted to see what it would look like trimmed or edged or whatever. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Let me know if you have any questions and I will get back to you. And until next time, guys, so much love. Bye.